A lot of the times you can catch it getting something wrong, but then maybe you keep trusting the next thing that it says.
Our skepticism tends to be domain specific. So it activates where we have expertise, but tends to go quiet everywhere else. Imagine you're reading a magazine on a subject that you know really well. You find it full of errors. We are especially vulnerable to it because AI output looks equally confident in pretty much every area. The main thing to keep in mind is trying to assess where your knowledge runs out.
For those of you that are new here that don't know me, my name is Lior. I run a newsletter called Exploring ChatGPT on Substack, and I'll hand over the introduction to Andrea to introduce himself.
My name's Andrea. I'm a management consultant and the writer of The Art of Asking Questions on Substack.
I'm sure a lot of people that use AI feel similarly that a lot of the times you can catch it getting something wrong, but then maybe you keep trusting the next thing that it says, right? So this is a really interesting topic to me. I think it also ties into maybe some feedback loops and things like that as well. So why do you think this happens, Andrea?
So there's many reasons, but I think one important reason is that our skepticism tends to be domain specific. So it activates where we have expertise, but tends to go quiet everywhere else. So to give you a practical example, so imagine you're reading a magazine on a subject that you know really well. I don't know, say the sports section on a sport that you're passionate about. You read the reporting and you find it full of errors, terrible reporting, cause and effect reversed, doesn't make any sense. Frustrated, you put the magazine down, you leave it, and you're not very happy with it. Then a few hours later, you sit back on the sofa, open the magazine on a different page, and you trust that page, say, I don't know, on international relations, even though your previous experience on the sports page was terrible. And so it's this sort of amnesia. So have you forgotten that article was terrible? But we do that a lot. And with AI, we are especially vulnerable to it because AI output looks equally confident in pretty much every area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also like there's some point to when people use AI, the general population uses AI, they forget to read the fine print at the bottom that says, like, for example, on ChatGPT, it says ChatGPT is AI. AI can make mistakes. And it sounds so confident, like you mentioned, that we just take it for what it is. And also there's a lot of bias that comes into play and agreeableness that comes into play as well. I personally don't think this, but I want to know what you think. I want to know if you think that this has to do with most people being a bit uncritical, and maybe a lack of critical thinking to realize that, hey, maybe I should check a source or ask more questions.
Yeah, I think there's various reasons here. But first of all, in our everyday lives, we take lots of cognitive shortcuts. We can't validate every single bit of information that we come across, right? So if you need to change a bulb and you're looking for instructions on the internet, you look up how to change a bulb, follow the instructions, and you change it. You don't go into electrical engineering or anything like that. You just trust that information. And I think we have got used to trusting information we find online because in the past it was curated. And now we are transferring that feeling that information on the internet is curated towards AI. And but AI is not curated, it's statistically generated. And so it doesn't quite work in the same way. And so we are still taking cognitive shortcuts, which I think are absolutely necessary. Life would be exhausting without cognitive shortcuts, but they don't apply in quite the same way. And another aspect here is that the people who are best at catching mistakes in their own field can be very vulnerable elsewhere because they get used to trusting the judgment really broadly. And that's something that I need to be very aware of because I do this a lot. I need to trust my judgment a lot. And my job is very in depth in my subject area. And so I need to be very conscious of the fact that if I read something in a parallel field, I would probably get it, but not necessarily properly understand it.
So there's a difference. What you're saying is the difference between properly understanding and maybe evaluating a topic. right? Especially if you have expertise in that topic versus simply just understanding what you're reading, what the output might give you. So let's say, like for me as an example, if I'm diving into a topic in the sciences, because I do have a background in the sciences, I might be able to evaluate it better than others. Whereas I can go and check a source, let's say a scientific journal, and understand some of the mathematics behind it or things of that nature. Whereas people without that background will have to do more research and actually not just take an answer and say, this is now truth. So, what's the difference between, in your opinion, understanding an output from an LLM versus actually evaluating that output?
Well, I think the example you presented makes a lot of sense. My own background is also scientific. I studied nuclear and energy engineering at university, but I've not been doing that job for longer than I'd like to admit. Essentially, if I read an article on, I would usually get it. Like I know the main concepts involved, I know the types of, technical infrastructure, that sort of stuff. But I won't be able to evaluate it because the technology has shifted from when I studied. And so I can see the main pieces of the jigsaw and I can put them together, but not be able to, even if I do understand the basic science behind it, I won't be able to go and validate each and every aspect of the claims being made.
So, I guess the next question is how should people go about this then? How should people actually do this in practice? If it's actually very similar for me to your story, because I do have a science background, but I haven't touched it in a long time. I still consider myself somewhat young. I'm 31, but I have a degree in physics, which I haven't touched in 10 years, 9, 10 years. Modern day physics really just flies over my head, but I feel I'm still able to go and, for example, check a source and skim a scientific article and probably have a deeper understanding of it than someone who has no background. But I think actually that's one of the special things about AI is that if you want to dive into a topic and learn more about it, it can definitely help you learn and it can definitely help you critically think. So, my question to you is what should people do in practice? I know there was a cool infographic that you want to share. If you want to share your screen, there's a cool image that you had there.
Yes, thank you. Let me put that on screen now. So, what you should be seeing on screen now is what we're calling an AI output validation funnel. And you can see a number of steps that you can follow to assess whether an initial AI output is credible and whether it's fully validated. And you can see a number of steps here that we'll be exploring now. So the first one is called expertise boundary, followed by a model cross-check, source verification, a logic audit, and an expert spot check. This is not something we're suggesting everybody should do all the time. We'll also explore when it's appropriate to put this amount of effort into checking whether AI is correct. But yeah, we'd like to have a bit of a conversation around this funnel because it's a really practical tool. And I will publish this in an upcoming article over the next few days.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I noticed in there one of the things that stood out to me is like recommending using a second model. And I think that's a really important point. A lot of people are too reliant on one model. I was the same way for a long time. And the more I experiment with AI, the more I realize, especially if I don't have expertise in the subject, I realize this model is better for this, that model is better for that. And actually, when I'm able to use multiple models simultaneously for one project, that project tends to come out a lot better. So, what do you think about using a second model in this case?
Yeah, so for this specific purpose, in terms of validating AI outputs, what you're looking for is not necessarily a second opinion from the second large language model, but it's more about looking for disagreement. If two models confidently contradict each other or disagree with each other, that is a very direct signal that something is fishy and needs in-depth verification. The fact that models agree is not a sign that things are correct. And that's also important to acknowledge because models can hallucinate, they can be giving you incorrect results. As you were saying earlier, they can very confidently state something just to agree with you. So, yeah, agreement is not a sign of correctness, but disagreement is a very strong sign that you should check something in more detail.
Absolutely. And before we get into actually doing that check, I want to mention that what I've found it's a big gray area with AI now is when I'm trying to make future projections, which I think is something that is probably the next big wave of AI. Right now, we're moving towards AI agents, and that's already huge and growing like crazy. But I think that maybe the next big thing is predictive AI, where you can set up a model to with certain variables, right? Let's say X plus Y equals Z, right? And then you can change those variables and see what the predictive outcome might be. And a lot of the times now, when I'm using LLMs to try and predict some type of future outcome, the feedback loop is never ending. Unless I specifically ask it to stop, it never stops. But when it comes down to actually finding some information that's more direct, right? Like, for example, in mathematics or in the sciences, typically there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, right? And so when I'm actually diving into those type of topics, really any topic at all, I always ask for citations and studies. And when I write my articles, I always have a references section and I cite them properly throughout the article. So, what do you think about citations in general?
Yeah, citations are essential. And actually, my personal approach to citation is using Perplexity because I find it's much faster than the others in terms of surfacing links and supporting evidence. Um, but still, AI can hallucinate citations, and there's actually two potential challenges here. One is when citations are completely hallucinated, so you're given a citation that doesn't exist, and that's the first problem. That needs validation. Every citation you get needs validation simply in the form of a click. Does that link surfaced by AI actually work? But then there's another challenge with citations, which is that AI might have given you a summarized response based on the full text of the site of the article or report it is referencing or whatever else is being cited. But that interpretation or some summary made by the large language model could be completely incorrect. So you're being given a source, the source works, the title of the source seems generally aligned with the point you want to make, but then when you actually read the source, you find out that it's making a different point, or maybe that was a minor point made in the article. Just the other day, actually, I was looking for some evidence of a specific claim I was making in a report, and the Perplexity came up with a very confident citation. So and so article found that this phenomenon is very strongly documented. I went and read the article, and that was two respondents in a major survey that had made the point that I was trying to make. So Perplexity had massively overstated the claim of the article. And if I had trusted that citation, it would have been a big problem for myself, my reputation, basically.
It's interesting. I think it's also very topic dependent, right? Like, for example, let's say you're diving into history. Based on that model's training and biases and what it thinks about you and what you want to hear, it might generate outputs based on those biases that actually would require you to ask more questions to actually understand the truth. And I think I give history as an example because history is so nuanced, right? And if you don't go back far enough, for example, the truth from 100 years ago might be different than 2 or 300 years. Whereas I think that's why I like to stick to the sciences personally. I stick within my niche, which is AI and science. And I think that's because it's more direct. And at the end of the day, like when you're looking for answers, all of these questions and answers within the sciences are based on basically the shoulders of their ancestors, right? They keep building on each other and building on each other. So, this new scientific discovery is now the best evidence that we have of the current reality's truth. Whereas I don't have to go back and see what was previously because we know now this is correct. So I think it's also very topic dependent. But I guess the another question I have here in terms of this is, let's say you don't have expertise in a subject, right? Is there a check that anybody can run on any specific topic, regardless of their expertise?
Yes, I think there are two potential things you can do there. So the first one is the most direct one. So you can check the logic. So do the conclusions follow from the evidence and the narrative that you're being presented? First of all, also, was there evidence in the first place, or is it just a series of arguments that are being shown to you? Are causes and effects in the right order? So this type of reasoning check. So you're not checking the knowledge. You're assuming that the knowledge is correct for a minute and saying, assuming that what's on this page is right, is it being presented in a way that is not biased? It makes sense and it stacks up when you read it all together. This is actually something that I also do using AI. So whenever I write a report or an article, I put in a large language model and I simply ask, does this stack up? And that is really helpful in terms of identifying flaws in the logic, in the narrative gaps that need to be filled. Otherwise, the reader won't be able to follow your reasoning. So this is a first strategy if you don't know a subject. The other strategy is to speak with an expert. So this is not something you can do as much in your everyday life. But for example, when I use AI professionally and I'm not sure about something, I will go to an expert. It could be somebody in my network, it could be a colleague, and just ask. And we should never forget that is always an option. Now we're so used to finding information online, asking AI, but there still are human experts out there, and it is worth asking sometimes, especially when what the consequences of the text that we are working with are potentially significant.
So before we get into more about this process, I want to get into your actual how this applies to you because you're in consulting, right? So when you're fact checking or when you want to get the logic correct, yeah, your process might be different than others, but it also might be more significant that you actually get things right, right? Whereas for someone that's just researching something for their own personal reasons, that's a bit different than if when you're actually in the business world and you have to make sure that everything's on T. So before we get into more about the actual process of checking, I want to know how this might be different for you in your field.
Yeah, so it's basically it almost always has to be quite a detailed, in-depth process. In practice, I can never trust AI. I use AI a lot in my role, but I can never fully trust what it's giving me at face value. Everything always needs at least a bit of checking. And the only cases where this whole process, this whole funnel about trusting AI doesn't apply in full is when I'm doing work that is internally focused. So if I'm developing an internal draft of something, starting point for something, if I need to rewrite an email to make sure it strikes the right balance, the right tone, there are lots of things that I do without doing a whole lot of checking. But anything that goes out of the company effectively, goes out to clients needs quality assurance. And in many cases, consultancy companies are ISO 9001 certified. That's a quality management certification. And as part of that, somebody, meaning a human person, needs to take responsibility for everything that goes out of the company. And yeah, given my senior role, everything that I send out or everything that colleague sends me to then send out, it needs to go through pretty in-depth checks.
That actually, I think, ties back into our last live stream a little bit about AI excuses, right?
Yeah.
Like in the professional world, there's no excuse. Someone's going to take the blame at the end of the day. It's not an excuse to say, this is what I got from ChatGPT or from Claude or from wherever. So I think that's a really important point that you're making. There has to be a human check. There has to be a human in the loop that says, okay, I approve this. I will take responsibility if something is off here because I think everything is looking good. So in terms of auditing the logic, back to that topic, whether it's asking more questions, the reasoning, or like you said, even at some point going to an expert within your circle and confirming what you have, how much of this process do you actually run every time?
In most cases, because I've been doing this job for a long enough time, in most cases I can stop at. So always check all the references and are the claims being made what the actual source is saying. So that always has to happen. And I always check the logic because as a consultant, you do a lot of reports, whether it's like a written report, like a PDF or a slide deck, you always need to make sure that the logic stacks up. And especially consultants are often asked to provide recommendations to clients, and you need to make sure that the story that you're telling adds up to the recommendations that you're presenting. For me, the logic of everything I put together is essential, and quite often, AI plays a role in supporting ideation, brainstorming of potential recommendations, but then that human in the loop mechanism needs to be there to actually assess which of these recommendations apply to a client in the sector, first of all, and then apply to this specific client and the problems that they're trying to solve, their organizational context, their organizational strategy and KPI. So there's a lot that needs to be human led. Yeah, long story short, as part of my role, a lot of this applies most of the time. The the part that doesn't apply as often is reliance on external experts. But I do work on some projects where that are within my area of expertise, but potentially towards the edges of my area of expertise. And so in those cases, I tend to work with external experts from the very beginning of a project to make sure that I can absorb enough knowledge about the subject, and then eventually, when I work with AI, I know enough to be able to assess, does this make sense? Does it stack up?
So I guess what I want to know is there's a lot of jobs right now. For example, let's say like attorneys, right? Where there's certain sectors within that field that may be, I don't want to say useless at some point, but less used. Like, for example, I'll give you in my own personal experience, let's say in writing contracts, right? Which we recently have experience with. And I have a lot of experience with using AI for contracts in my real estate business. I find, and this has been very good, even from the beginning, from when I started using AI around 3 years ago. I would, let's say for a lease or an agreement between me and a contractor, I was able to generate contracts very quickly. I would still send them to my attorney for review. So it's a similar thing, right? Because even though I'm confident in this contract, I've read over it, maybe there's something I've missed, a very specific clause of certain state laws and things like that. So I still sent it to my attorney to review. And I remember the first time I sent him a contract to review, he's like, yeah, this is perfect. You don't need to add anything to it. And that really surprised me because this was the very beginning of my AI usage. And I realized, wow, I don't need you for contracts anymore. Is that what you're saying? And that's not necessarily true. I do still need you for contracts. I just don't need you to write them anymore. I don't need to use your models anymore. I can generate the contract in seconds and send it to you for review. Relating this back to your field in consulting, do you think that something similar is happening now or something projecting into the future, in your opinion, where the actual scope of what a consultant does will change drastically because of AI?
I think there are some parts that are definitely changing and could change even more in future. For example, organizations now can get information much more easily than they could before. So it's not just Googling something is actually very labor intensive. If you need to get information from various sources, pull it together in a coherent summary, whereas now you can run a research report on any major large language model, and it does a pretty decent job for many purposes. I do see organizations going to consultants less with that sort of quick landscape review. Can you tell me about this subject type of use case? But I think we shouldn't forget that AI is probabilistic. It's not it's not based on a deterministic if this then that type of project, and it doesn't actually have any expertise. For example, if you try to answer a quiz using AI, you would find that quite often it gets answers wrong. Most of them will be right, but some of them will be wrong. And the there's no the answer to a quiz is right or wrong. So there's no doubt there, but still AI often gets that wrong. I think there's still a need for humans to be able to say what is correct. And I think consultants will still be needed for that in the longer term, especially to provide that type of nuanced understanding of the client context, the organization, the dynamics between people. Those are not things that AI can get easily. But that said, some organizations have started deploying AI interviewers. So instead of talking to you, I could be talking to an AI persona that looks like you and sounds like you. And in qualitative research, that is starting to be used. Now, would I like it if somebody sent me an invitation to speak with their AI? I wouldn't. How much of that is generational and tied to my habits versus the future? Some people might find it more comfortable actually to speak to a computer. So I think there's quite a lot there that will change in future. But one thing that has changed significantly to this point is how we rely on more junior colleagues. So in the past, projects used to have lots of aspects where you needed somebody more junior and effectively cheaper from a delivery perspective to do very time consuming jobs. But now a lot of those jobs can be done by AI. And so this is not between the consultant and the client, but it's the structure of the consultancy company itself. And this is extremely challenging because if we do too much of that and we don't worry about succession planning, so basically, if we don't train the new generation of consultants or professionals, we will be in trouble because somebody still does need to be able to write contracts, write reports, and deliver qualitative research. You can't let the machines do it all and then completely let go of expertise.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I had an article recently about a similar idea, which is basically, I think it ties to most fields, probably almost every field. If you get rid of junior engineers, junior consultants, junior attorneys, paralegals, the issue with that is that now you don't have people building years of experience in that specific field, right? So I think what actually will be more beneficial for society, because AI it's just a matter of fact at this point, right? It's as big, if not bigger than the internet. And if you're not using it in mostly every field, you're probably going to be left behind at some point. So I think that instead of we're seeing a lot of companies firing junior engineer level positions, for example, instead of firing these people, I think it probably will be more beneficial for the long term of that company, and not even that long term. It could be midterm because things are moving so fast now, is to actually not fire them, but hire them and look at their training process and realize maybe this needs to change. I think it's similar to, for example, like education. If I was in college now and I wasn't learning how to use I would have to take it upon myself to go and learn because I wouldn't want to enter the workforce with no knowledge of AI use and no experience. So I think instead of getting rid of training completely and replacing them with machines, we need to maybe take a second look at changing the actual training process. So, yeah, I think if I want to ask you from this conversation, which is it's a really interesting topic because we started with trust and now we're here. If people remember one thing from this conversation, what should it be in your opinion?
I think the main thing to keep in mind is trying to assess where your knowledge runs out. So when you're reading something, whether it's an AI output, something on a magazine, or watching TV, when you're assessing that information, try to understand whether you have enough knowledge to properly evaluate the claims being made, or if you are towards the edge of your knowledge or completely out of your depth. And that will give you the first signal that you need to move forward and decide, can I actually trust what I'm being shown?
Absolutely. So I will say before we wrap up, it's actually been a little weird technical glitch for me that I've never seen here before. Because Andrea sees that we're live, he sees the live chat, he sees the number of people that are in here, and for me, it looks like I'm still connecting to the live stream, like we never went live. So, Andrea, if you can see the people in the live room here, you can see the live chat. If you don't mind, while I take a second to try and maybe fix this, I'm gonna try and open another tab here and open. I'm not gonna close out of the live stream, but I'm gonna try and open up another tab and see if I can reload the live stream, and then I can also participate in the chat. But in the meantime, if you see anything in the chat that catches your eye and you wanna mention it to respond to any questions or anything, let me know. And I'm just gonna take a second to do this here. I'm gonna
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll give you a minute. But I think the first comment that came in was from Sean saying that if you don't give AI some customization, it tends to tell you that you should be WordPress and run every business venture because you're amazing and you never have a bad idea. And yeah, I think that is very much something AI does. It hallucinates, mixes things up, as Sean says in the chat. And I think that the greatest problem is that it still does it with customization. So at work, I use Claude mainly. My company has a Claude subscription for everybody on the team. And my own Claude has very strict rules about how to write, what to say, what not to say, what's acceptable versus what's not acceptable, how to cite sources. But it still makes mistakes. Arguably, it probably makes fewer mistakes compared to not having those rules, but it still makes mistakes. So, yeah, as Sean says, yeah, AI is a tool, it's not your brain. And actually, just earlier today, I saw a very inspiring note on Substack. It was from a designer who was arguing AI is really important. I use AI a lot as part of my job, but what I love is design. AI is a tool that I use to do what I love. And I think that's a very helpful way to frame it. Considering AI as a tool, it's a very clever tool, very advanced and transformational. But yeah, it's helpful to consider it as something that we do to do what we like. It's a means to an end.
yeah. So before I respond to that, unfortunately, I was not able to reload this live stream. And if I refresh the page, I'm afraid that it will probably just close the whole live
Yeah,
stream.
probably.
But I noticed that there was like 170 people. Yeah. Really appreciate you guys being here. Sorry that, first of all, I'm a little sick, but sorry that I'm not able to see the live chat. So hopefully Andrea can help me here. Andrea, tell me if you see this. I'm going to just type this into the live chat. Tell me if you see that. Do you see that?
I did see that, yes.
Okay. So that's the YouTube channel, guys, where I post these live streams as well as some clips. I'd really appreciate it if you guys head over there and subscribe to that YouTube channel. We already have one stream already up on there, and this one will be up as well in a couple days here. I do want to comment about the AI as a tool comment. In my opinion, AI can be used as a tool, but it is not a tool. And it's more of a philosophical reasoning for this, which is it's a very simple answer. A tool does not get to know you. And I've went over this already many times. A tool, let's say, in the most simple form is a hammer and a nail. The hammer does not care who is using it to put the nail into the wood. The result is the same, right? I think when you level up to more advanced forms of technology, it started with the internet. The internet does get to know you. It does collect your data, sell it in a massive data broker economy. AI has scaled that now to a whole new level. And me and Andrea spoke about this in the last live stream as well, which is your individual experience using AI, even if it's the same tool that somebody else is using, will be different depending on how much you've used it and how you've used it. So if I ask ChatGPT a question, my output, my response might be different than Andrea because of, let's say, the term length that we've used it and how we've used it. So because it gets to know you, especially if you have memory turned on, the outputs will be different. So that's why I think AI is not technically a tool. It can definitely be used as a tool, but because it's a personal experience, that's my opinion on that topic. I don't know if you want to expand on that anymore, Andrea, if there's any other comments, because again, I can't see the live chat.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. It is perhaps a novel generation of tools, which is not a tool anymore. It's something else. It's a different generation of companion, something that is besides me as I do my work. So yeah, I definitely agree with your framing that there's far more to it than hammer and nail. At the same time, there's training data, statistics that determine what word comes next. It does have some features of a tool, but also some features that tools absolutely don't have. So yeah, I think as you said, a lot of this turns into a philosophical discussion that is very nuanced. And I think in the end, it's also about how we feel individually about AI. I don't think there is a correct answer. How do you feel when you use your AI tool?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Anything else
let,
in the
let-
live chat that catches your attention?
yes, there was a point about your business plus AI plus good relationships equal to success. Yeah, completely agree with that. And especially in consulting, without good relationships, there's no business to be had. There were some comments supporting our conversation about the checks doing AI and your perspective on contracts and the fact that human contract review is still essential. This was Frank. I have the same perspective of contracts and find that human contract review is still essential, especially including the fact that AI can get contract review wrong. And I think that is very true.
Yeah. I can give another example of that personally. Similar to contracts, it's more so, let's say, like government related documents. So if you're, and I have personal experience with this with people in my family, not me personally, because I was born in the United States of America, but if you're applying to become a citizen, right, or to take those steps to becoming a US citizen, there's steps. You have to get a social security number, a permanent resident card, aka a green card, and then steps and interviews and things of that nature. And I personally think that if you can allow yourself to monetarily, I think that it's still better to go and get an attorney to help you along that process. Because if you just simply rely on AI, for example, to help you with those documents and things of that nature, that process might not run as smoothly. And I've seen, even now in the age of AI, personally, family members who are going through that process who use attorneys and they're able to skip steps in the process because the attorneys have been doing this for years and they know how to do it so perfectly that when they apply for citizenship or they apply for a green card or they apply for a social security number, everything is perfect. So when the government receives those documents, they say, we have more than enough information to believe that this person is legitimately trying to become a citizen, right? Whereas if you just take shortcuts and you try to use AI for everything along that process, you might actually get something sent back to you saying, hey, you missed this or you missed that, or hey, we need you to come in for an interview. Whereas on the attorney side, interview was skipped completely. They didn't even have to come in. The government got enough paperwork, enough documents. So I think that's another example of, yeah, human experience still matters and human expertise still matters. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And I actually had that experience. It was before the time of AI, but I was born in Italy. I'm an Italian citizen, but now I am also a British citizen. And to get British citizenship, it is a very tedious process. They are very similar to what you've described. And I personally decided to pay an attorney to just do that, provide that certainty that whatever documentation was needed was being provided. And to give the opposite experience, last time I had to submit my taxes as something called a self assessment. if you have any non-work related income in the UK. And I've had very long discussions with AI about what should I put in this box. And I actually couldn't get to a sensible answer. So yeah, it confirms exactly what you have described.
I can give actually another point on this real quick to actually flip it, which will show you why not only should you have some experts around you, whether it's attorneys, accountants, whatever it might be, sometimes they will miss things too. And I have a specific example personally now where health insurance, for example, it's a huge issue here in the States. It's a, and in my opinion, I believe in free markets. I believe in capitalism. However, I think that there's certain parts that are taking advantage of people. And I think one of those is the health insurance market. If I hadn't used AI to dissect my past 3 years of health insurance payments and the whole process that I went through, I wouldn't have gotten to this result, which I've gotten to now, which to keep it brief is I've been overpaying for health insurance for the past 3 years for a simple reason that when you apply, it asks you for your gross income, right? Now, I see gross income. I say, okay, that's my income before taxes. No, it's actually modified adjusted gross income, or MAGI, as people like to call it. So then I went back into my tax return and I said, hey, I plugged my tax return into ChatGPT. I said, hey, so what should I have been paying? What should I be doing? And actually, it showed me you should have been putting this number in, not this number. So now, and then it tells me now you can go to your accountant and say, hey, this is the mistake that I made. This is my tax documents for health insurance over the past few years. This is what I should have been paying based on my modified adjusted gross income. Send this to the IRS. I want my money back, basically. So it ties into this topic perfectly because a good combination of both, I think, will be the most successful.
Yeah. And usually that's my experience as well. AI really genuinely elevates what I can do. But yeah, you still need to bring in that deep professional expertise.
Yep.
There's another comment here on the point regarding lower level entry jobs being replaced by AI and how can AI and these jobs coexist to keep a human element to still check and keep AI in line. That is a very tricky one because large companies are under big pressure from their shareholders to realize efficiencies and to be more cost efficient, to have higher profits and margins. And so they can make decisions that are short sighted. So essentially, if we end up firing all people in entry roles and replace them with AI, all the large companies in 15 years' time will be fighting for a shrinking pool of talent, which is completely unsustainable. And if we have achieved artificial general intelligence by then, maybe we won't need humans to do work anymore. Who knows? But the predictions on that have been changing year on year. But I want to share a specific perspective on that from a small company because I work in a small consultancy company. And that all becomes about succession planning. Essentially, if you don't train up the new generations in the company to grow in seniority and then get to leadership positions, effectively, there is no exit route for the senior leaders of today. So for succession planning and long-term sustainability, today's senior leader need to bring in a pipeline of employees at different levels and keep supporting them in the growth through the company. And AI is a big piece here, but it plays a big role, but we can't do without humans. And I think that's been my experience of that. Anything you'd like to say on that, Leo?
I just agree 100%. I do have to run because I have to go to work, but I just plain and simple, I just agree. I think it's a mistake to fire junior level positions. I think that it's unsustainable, AGI or not. It's not a road a path that I want to walk down.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be good for society in general. Yeah. Before we wrap up, first of all, thank you, Andrea, for being here. Thank you for everybody in the live stream as well, even though I can't see you and I can't see the chat. I wish I could. Before we wrap up, let me know if you see that again, Andrea. I just plugged the YouTube link one more time. If you guys can head over there and subscribe, comment, I would really appreciate it. We're definitely trying to grow the YouTube channel as well. And yeah, basically, that's all I got. This was a really fun conversation, Andre. I really appreciate you joining me again. It's definitely a different angle into AI than I usually explore. So, yeah, if there's anything else you want to say before we wrap up,
No, just it's been a great conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, again, thank you everyone for being here, wherever you are in the world, morning, afternoon, evening. Have a great rest of your day. Head over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye now.